You are listening to Amplify Your Success Podcast, episode 213. And today we're going to go behind the scenes and discover the anatomy of hype marketing and why it's a must for any expert or authority ready to make a greater impact. So let's get started. Welcome to the Amplify Your Success Podcast. Get ready to ramp up your revenue, amplify your impact, and make your mark in the world. This is the show for experts, thought leaders, and service professionals who want to shatter their limits and achieve that next level. You're going to find out from other experts and influencers how they made it. Now, let's get amplified. Hey there, inspired entrepreneurs and business leaders. It's your host, authority amplifier, and success catalyst, Melanie Benson. I'm excited to bring this next episode to you because I almost wasn't going to air this expert because I'm not a fan of hype. But when I dug in and I really understood the value of what he's teaching, I knew it was a must to bring to you, because if we're building our business as an authority, we want to shift out of obscurity, go beyond just being seen as an expert, and stand out in a crowded market. Hype can be a tool when used efficiently and with high values, then it's a very powerful tool. And when I look at the teachings of being an authority amplifier, it's so perfect. So I'm excited to introduce you to our guest today. And while I'm talking about authority amplifiers, have you mastered all 7 authority amplifiers as we're moving into this new year? So you are no longer a best kept secret. You're not getting passed over, but you're actually a go-to influence and authority in your space. Look, it's not hard to stand out in a crowd, but you do need to be very intentional about 7 specific factors in your business and in your marketing. And I'd like to show you what they are. I'd like to gift you my Authority Amplifiers course and invite you into the Amplify Your Authority community as my gift. Just head to authorityamplifiers.com. That's authorityamplifiers.com. I'll also link that up in the show notes. And you will get a guest pass into our exclusive Facebook group, where I am going to be giving you all kinds of resources and the collaboration and the connections and the opportunity to showcase who you are as an expert is very powerful. So we'll see you there. Now, let's get into today's episode. Welcome back, Amplifiers. Today, we're going to talk about the anatomy of hype. Let me introduce you to my guest, Michael F. Schein. He is the founder and president of Microfame Media, which is a marketing agency that specializes in making idea-based companies famous in their fields. Some of his clients have included eBay, Magento, the Medici Group, University of Pennsylvania, University of California, Irvine, LinkedIn, Citrix. We're talking about some big name companies here. His writing has appeared in Fortune, Forbes, Inc., Psychology Today, and Huffington Post, and he's a speaker for international audiences spanning from the northeastern United States to the southeastern coast of China. His book, The Hype Handbook, 12 Indispensable Success Secrets from the World's Greatest Propagandists, Self-Promoters, Cult Leaders, Mischief Makers, and Boundary Breakers, was published by McGraw-Hill and has appeared everywhere books are sold, starting January 12th, 2021. So, Michael, I have been looking forward to this conversation about hype. And, people have such an interesting relationship to this word. Why did you decide to write a book about hype?
Well, thank you, Melanie. It really is a pleasure to be here. I've been looking forward to it as well ever since we first talked a while back. And I'll start with your question about the word itself, or I'll take that as the unspoken question, because there's no secret that most people consider the word hype to be a negative word. And you might wonder why I chose that particular word. Why didn't I say marketing? Why didn't I say promotion? And I was really inspired by hip hop of all things, because if you look at rap groups, especially older rap groups, there was always a member of the group called the hype artist. And unlike most other communities, hype was not considered a negative thing. Hype was considered an integral part of the art form. So the person would actually go out and lead kind of the street teams and get the crowds worked up, and they would also rap. And the idea was that getting the crowd emotionally engaged and getting them to spread the word to other people was as much a part of the fun and a part of the show and what made it possible as anything else. And that really speaks to why I wrote the book. I feel that people are so often afraid of generating a large amount of emotion on behalf of their own stuff, on behalf of the stuff they're creating and trying to get out into the world, that sometimes they're unable to get that stuff out into the world. So I wanted to sort of change people's mental relationship with hype. So I really actively picked that word. I specifically picked that word.
So we're basically flipping what people's story is about hype. Some people might have a negative connotation to it. We're transforming it into a powerful verb, if you will.
Absolutely.
I love it. Well, so, let's define hype the way you see it then. Like if we could, look up hype in Michael's dictionary, what is it meaning to you these days?
It has a very clear definition in my dictionary. So I define hype as any activity or set of activities that generate powerful emotion from a large group of people in order to get them to take an action that you want them to take. And that can be on behalf of very nefarious, immoral causes. And that can be on behalf of beautiful, wonderful causes. But it's amoral. It's just generating emotion of any kind for a specific purpose to move them in a certain direction.
And why? I mean, you've written a whole book on hype. Like, why is hype something that we might want to explore and master as a business owner or someone who's building a business around their expertise or authority?
So I can answer this a couple of ways. There's sort of the macro and the micro perspective. So from the micro perspective, I, as you mentioned, own a marketing agency, and most of our clients are idea-based businesses. And what that means is that they're things like consultants, companies that aren't selling necessarily, sheet metal or ball bearings, right? They're selling, systems and structures and ideas and processes. And something that I learned pretty early on, or noticed, I should say, is that I would often, mediocre consultants and mediocre idea-based businesses, they just fail. I mean, you can't not be good at what you do and be successful. However, I would often notice very good consultants, or just plain good consultants. They're good at what they do. They provide a service. They meet their deadlines, come in on budget, but they're not really changing the world in a big way with the actual stuff they're producing. They're providing a service. And then I noticed excellent consultants that their processes had the potential to just be groundbreaking. When they did have the chance to work with a client, they just revolutionized their efficiency or their creativity or whatever it is they were there to solve. And what I often noticed was that the good consultants, the just plain good consultants, would just be extremely financially successful. And the excellent consultants would always be scrapping for work. And I dug into why, because that didn't make sense to me. And what I found was that the excellent consultants often had this, I would almost call it a chip on their shoulder. It was this idea that, my stuff is so wonderful, and it was, that the cream will rise to the top. When people see what I'm doing, it should just be evident to them that this is for them. And as a result, they wouldn't really package their stuff. They wouldn't think about the psychology of how they were presenting it at all. In fact, they would sometimes overcomplicate it because, they needed everyone to know the ins and outs of what they were doing. And the sort of the run-of-the-mill good consultants, they focused a whole lot on hype, on generating emotion, on positioning themselves as sort of gurus, on creating very strong points of view, on doing a lot of these things. And as a result, they would be very, very successful. And so I said, from a more macro sense, you see this a lot in society. A lot of times, the people who have not very good ideas, sometimes even harmful ideas, they're so good at driving emotion that they get all kinds of people worked up about their awful ideas. And then you see people with wonderful ideas, wonderful art, wonderful causes, wonderful new businesses, and they don't see the world as it really is. They see the world as it ought to be, and they don't get their ideas out there. So it just started to really bother me that the bad guys came to this stuff so much more naturally than the good guys, even though there's nothing inherently bad about these principles. So it just sort of became vital to me to put these tools in the hands of the people who needed it, so we can make the world, a little bit of a better place.
I love that so much. And, we had this original conversation about hype. I'm like,
Yeah.
Michael, I love the idea of this, but I'm not a big hype fan,
Right.
especially in our industry where people get so sensitive to these smoke and mirrors that are often created. And, I think being able to recognize the root of this word and what's possible is we want to create an emotional response. We're trying to move people to take an action. That's what marketing's all about.
Right.
And I think a lot of people are afraid to get people emotionally engaged because they see the negative. And if more people started to engage from the positive and, they learn how to do hype from a very powerful place where we're actually doing good work in the world because we're hyping people into action, this could be a good thing. So I'm glad that you're getting this word out there in the world.
Yeah, and I'll say that even though it's for a variety of reasons that we can discuss if we have time, more nefarious characters like propaganda artists and cult leaders and things like that take to this stuff more naturally. Some of the greatest quote unquote hype artists, by my definition, who use the exact same strategies with different content, were some of the best people in history. I mean, Martin Luther King was so savvy when it came to using the media, framing his ideas in a way that they were digestible, driving action using a lot of these strategies that I discuss in the book and use in my work, that it's just so clear that the strategies for driving this emotion have absolutely, they're neither positive nor negative. It's all about what you use them in service of.
Well, let's unpack that for a minute, because that was actually on my mind, is who are some of the people who, in your opinion, have used hype for the greater good?
Yeah, I mean, so let's start with the example that I just used, Martin Luther King. I mean, a lot of people know that he made sure that the media was there for all of his activities. So when people were being sprayed by fire hoses and brutalized, the only reason that passive resistance worked was that the media was there to capture it, right? So that's a relatively well-known example, but there are other examples as well that I found when I was going through this book. So there's a strategy of hype that's really effective in a wide variety of situations that I call milk before meat, because a lot of various religions and even cults have used the phrase "give the babies their milk before you give them their meat." So what that essentially means is that human brains really have a hard time with rapid, massive change. So if you're in a religion, a brand new religion, and every new religion is weird when it first comes on the scene because the beliefs are not what we encounter every day. So if you have a brand new religion that you're trying to promote, and you say, "Hey, so let me tell you about the fact that there are aliens on the lip of a volcano that put all the bad thoughts in our head and created humanity," you would say to them, and that's what people say that Scientology at its highest levels promote. You would say, "What are you talking about? That's insane. I can't." I mean, aliens, what do you mean? But if you say to them, listen, you might want to come with me and visit this group. We do this personal betterment assessment that can really get you to be more productive at your work, which is what Scientology starts with. Well, that's pretty good. I want to be better at my work. I want to be more efficient. So a lot of mainstream religions, but also cults use this tactic a lot. Martin Luther King did this as well. So as an African American in the 50s and 60s, he had every reason to take a stance more like the Black Panthers or Malcolm X, that was very angry at white America. They were being forced, African Americans, to live like third-class citizens, and anyone would be forgiven for having a more revolutionary sort of framing for what he was saying. But think about his language. If you hear his most famous speeches, he would talk about very revolutionary thoughts for the United States of America, which integration was. And he would wrap them in things that white Americans are very comfortable with. There's all kinds of patriotic language. He quotes from the Battle Hymn of the Republic, City Upon a Hill, From Sea to Shining Sea, just this very, very Americana language to promote integration. And so he introduced this quote unquote radical idea. It shouldn't be radical because integration should be normal, but it was radical for America, a country that had slavery, by introducing it wrapped in apple pie and the flag. So that's one particular example. I can go on. I mean, Thomas Edison, Richard Branson, there are quite a few great examples, and I can spend as much time as you'd like on the stories. But yeah, there are
probably do a whole course on this, or they could read your book, right?
Right.
I think there are several very powerful orators throughout history. Winston Churchill. I think Bill Clinton was a very powerful speaker. Like, there are a lot of people who embrace hype to move people into action. And so as we're talking this through, I was thinking to myself, like, if I'm listening to this right now, and of course I'm going to buy your book and we'll tell you how to do that later. But if I was just going to start somewhere with this, and I wanted to start embracing the positive power of hype, and what would I do differently in my marketing or in the way I speak? Like, what would be one thing I would do differently?
Yeah, I'll give you two principles that I think are very actionable very quickly, that you can really kind of roll out right away and change your mindset with. So, basically, I've distilled all of these many people that I've studied and these many tactics and these many interviews and many things I've tried into 12 principles, right? But there are two of those 12 that I think are really good starting places. One is something I call make war, not love. And so it turns out, for a variety of reasons, that human beings, even human beings we think are really nice people, are tribal in nature to an extreme that maybe we don't even realize. So oxytocin, which is the cuddle hormone, it's the thing that causes parents to bond with their children, that causes romantic couples to bond, that gives us that warm, loving feeling, of a deep relationship. It's the same hormone that causes us to dislike outsiders. It's the racism hormone, which is really interesting. And I talk in the book about why that is. There are a lot of theories about why that happened from an evolutionary point of view, but it's just the way it is. And it doesn't have to be about racism or anything negative, but the fact of the matter is we bond with people more like us by rejecting those who aren't like us. It's the reason that in that old movie, old now, in Independence Day, the only thing that could bring the earth together was an alien invasion. So what am I telling you, to go out and pick fights with people? No. But I think what I see a lot of people do in their businesses, they just talk about how great their product is, or if they're a little more subtle than that, they talk about what problems they're solving for their customers. And that's great. And both of those things are important. But what they're often forgetting to do is create a very strong point of view. And the best way to do that is to define yourself against the other points of view out there. So a question I often ask my clients when we're first starting out, I say, what's a point of view in your field? Like something that is just a common, a common thing that people preach or that they believe in. So for example, in the project management world, it might be that more functionality in a piece of product management software is better. And so what's a point of view like that makes you angry, that you just totally disagree with? And then what's the point of view that is contrary to that? So a good example of that is there's this company, Basecamp, which has a product called Basecamp, and it is a really successful project management tool that has like 5 functions. It's extremely stripped down. And it's a really great tool, but most project management tools, I might have said product management, I meant project management. Most project management tools are really complex because people try to build more functionality in. Now, what these guys, Jason Fried and David Hansen Heinemeier, who created this tool, what they do is they constantly bash companies that are bloated, not by name, but they'll say the entire way people work is wrong. They add complexity, they work too many hours. They wrote a book about it called Rework. Why do they do that? Because there's this whole tribe now of people who agree with them. They're the leader of this movement of simplicity and efficiency that defines themselves against the hustle culture that's everywhere else. And as a result, they buy these people's products. So that's one. I mean, it's okay to have a us versus them mentality if you channel it productively, and you can do that pretty quickly. The other thing that I think is really important and that you can do right away is to realize that the greatest hype artists make it seem like their following and their success is grassroots while working really hard to build what I call a secret society, or just a really tight-knit group of people who pull strings for each other behind the scenes. And there are all kinds of stories that are fun that I can tell about people doing this. But as a concrete takeaway, it's really important to find those people who can make things happen for you, connect with them on a very human level. Maybe you look at social media and you find out what bands or sports teams you both like while everyone else is hitting them up for business advice. Connect around that, help them out, do favors for them. Because then when you need to make your next big project happen, you kind of on the down low say, hey, listen, can you help me out? Can you introduce me to some people? All the while making it seem like it's all just sort of happening spontaneously. So those are 2 things that are really, really powerful that I've personally used a lot for myself and my clients, and that I think anyone can kind of go out and do.
Those are really powerful. Okay, so we've been talking about the book. I know it's available pretty much everywhere books are sold.
Yeah.
Is there a particular place where you would suggest people go to get the book first?
Yeah, I think, I'm sure a lot of people go to Amazon. I'm encouraging Barnes and Noble if you're going to shop online, just because as much as they are a big bad company, they're also we all love Barnes and Noble stores, and they're all trying to keep their bookstores alive, which we all like going to. So if you can buy those, buy some books from them online instead of Amazon, I think that could be, great if we like having our bookstores around. And of course, if you have a local bookstore that's good about bringing in, an independent bookstore that's good about bringing in new books, I always encourage buying from them if they're open.
I agree. I totally agree. I think we should be supporting our local bookstores, but sometimes people rely on convenience, and that's okay too.
Yeah.
I will link up in the show notes how to find the book, The Hype Handbook, 12 Indispensable Success Secrets from the World's Greatest Propagandists, self-promoters, cult leaders, mischief makers, and boundary breakers.
It's a mouthful. I know. It's like the Borat title.
It's kind of fun to say, though. It's
Yeah,
like
exactly.
practicing a tongue twister. I keep saying, like, am I saying that word right? But we will link that up for you. And then you were mentioning something really cool. If people just want to connect with you once they get the book, you were talking about your Hype Book Club. Tell us about that and how we can jump on that.
So this is one of the most fun things that I'm involved with. I really enjoy doing this, and I think that members of the club enjoy it too. And it's free; it's not a paid club. But basically, what happened is when I first started my business, the reason that I got to all this hype stuff and got so interested, I went on my own as a corporate copywriter or a content writer, and I had a really hard time marketing myself. I didn't really understand sales and marketing at all. So I started reading every book that there was about sales and marketing, and it did very little for me because it was talking about all the different tools and the different platforms and the sales funnels, and I just wasn't even there yet. It didn't help me. And so then I started looking at alternate sources, and I've always been a big reader. And I always liked kind of weird books. So I said, well, what if I just start reading about these interesting characters who I've always been fascinated by, who were kind of marketers who didn't call themselves marketers, again, the rock band managers and the propaganda artists and the cult leaders, and books on mass psychology. And when I started learning from those sources, and applying those tactics, those strategies ethically, it made all the difference. And that's what turned from a freelance practice to an agency, et cetera, et cetera. So all that to say, I wanted other people to get the benefit of my reading and my research. And especially for this book, I was reading all of these really helpful, but unusual books. So every so often I started sending lists of those books out to people and just trying to, write the descriptions in my irreverent style or whatever it is that people would call it. But as a result, people have really enjoyed it. They've gotten some book recommendations that they wouldn't have gotten elsewhere. They tell me that it's really transformed their business because it wasn't on the typical kind of airport business book lists. And they have fun with it. So yeah, it's become a pretty central part of what I do. It's become a little community. We talk about the books. We go back and forth on email, and everyone seems to really enjoy it.
Cool. And so how do they find that group?
Yeah, so all you really have to do is go to a URL. It's hypereads.com/list. And just put your information in and I'll send you the recommendations. It's that easy.
Cool. That is easy. And I will hook that up for you guys in the show notes as well. Hypereads.com/list. That's the free Hype Book Club that Michael's been sharing his cool finds and books that he's learning from. I think that's such a great idea.
Thank you.
So, Michael, before we wrap up, I always like to learn a little bit more about my guest, and I'm sure our Amplify community would like to know a little bit more about, your journey. You shared a little bit. I'm always curious, like, what do you think is the boldest move or the boldest thing that you did to get where you're at today?
Well, I did a really, really bold thing, but it was after 8 years of cowardice. So I never wanted to own a business or be involved in business, which is funny because now I like running a business, but I wanted to do something artistic, most notably write novels or play in a band. And I did play in a band, and we had some limited success, but I ultimately couldn't make a living at it. And I went and I got a job. And because I'm a pretty hard worker and whatever other qualities I have, I started to do well there. And for the first 3 years, it was fine. I learned a lot. But I was there 8 years, and it was a very, very brass tacks job. It was an industry that just wasn't for me. And I was just more and more every year. I would say by the end, I was flat out depressed, but I was scared to death. I mean, the idea that I had no idea how to go out and make a living on my own. I didn't even know what that would look like. And I made a million excuses. I wouldn't even send out a resume for another job. I was just terrified to leave this job. And then when I found out that my daughter, who's now 10 years old, was on the way, I had this sort of hallmark moment. I just kind of imagined, I had wanted to do really creative things, and I imagined my daughter taking me to like career day or whatever they call it, and me saying I'm a vice president of solution development for a business process outsourcer organization. And I just couldn't do it. So I left the job, and I had no real, I had a year's worth of savings, but I had never started anything on my own other than a rock band. And it was bold, and it was bold the whole time. And after that, I sort of burned my boats because I burned through all that money. I had no knowledge in sales and marketing in any real way. I knew corporate marketing, but that didn't serve me at all for what I was doing. And yeah, but I did it. I just went out and did it, and it scared me to death.
But it turned out okay in
the long run. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
I think a lot of people, they have that safety net for so long, and they're going to hear this, that it turned out okay. And it took a bold leap of faith, but sometimes you just got to jump off the cliff, and you got to figure it out as you go, or else you're never going to get unplugged from that safety net. So I know that was my story. I didn't have a year's worth of savings. I had like a month, and I was like, I took the leap, and I had to figure it out, and sometimes that's what you have to do.
Well, that's even more bold. I mean, that I'm a bit too much of a chicken for that. I had decided I wanted to leave and started saving money. I got some bonuses and saved them. So I think it's awesome to do what you did. I've always thought that it's, for me, good to have a little bit, to plan a little and have a little bit of cushion so that you don't make purely emotional decisions. But that's not always possible. But that was sort of my strategy.
Michael, let's be clear. I would never recommend anyone to do what I did. It is way too much. And you're exactly right. I am a huge fan of financial reserves, because you do make a lot of emotional, short-term, fear-based decisions when you're having to sink or swim. I also had the complexity of, I quit right 2 weeks before 9/11 happened. And so everything changed. Kind of like what we're going through right now.
Yeah, I was going to say, sometimes you just get thrust into a situation. I mean, this pandemic is, you could have planned and planned and planned, and no one expected this, right?
Exactly. And that's probably one of my biggest learnings. I would love to know what your biggest learning is, but one of my biggest learnings along the way has been, you can plan about 80% of the way. So in fact, I did an entire podcast episode on this, but there's 20% you can never plan for. And that means you've got to be willing to adapt to the moment you're in, and like pivot on a dime. And that's what makes successful entrepreneurs happen. So what was your biggest learning?
Right. I think that's exactly right.
What was your biggest learning, Michael?
Oh, in general. Well, I think my biggest learning, more holistically than all these little things I told you about that added up to my belief in hype, I think my biggest learning was the importance of finding side doors. So, for many years, my dream was to be a professional writer. And every morning I would get up while I was at my corporate job at 5 a.m. and write fiction. And when I would tell that to people, they would say, "Oh my gosh, you're so disciplined." And I would think to myself, I'm not really disciplined at all, because it's the only hour of my day that I'm not miserable. So I don't really find that discipline, right? But I was always kind of like, I had in my head this idea that the only way for me to achieve that dream would be to start publishing short stories, publish a novel. And that was such a long shot with the amount of work that I had, that it was very depressing, because it seemed like there was only one path to get to where I wanted to go. And when I finally left my job, I built this business. I did all these things that I didn't necessarily plan on doing. But now I have a book coming out, and it's a book that, even though it's a business book, I treated like I didn't treat as just like a business card. Some people just write a book because they think they should have a book. I hope it lived up to this, but I really treated it. I poured my heart and soul into it, and I'm very proud to have a book coming out. So I basically took a side door to a dream. And I think that a lot of times people don't do that. They have this very set sort of path of what they think achieving their goals requires. And as a result, they miss all of these kind of side routes to getting exactly to the same place. And I think it's important I found that it's really, really vital to keep an open mind with those sorts of things, those sorts of side roads and side doors.
I think that is brilliant. And I've never heard anybody say that before, but it's true. And again, I guess that's that entrepreneurial skill set in a way of stay open, because the path you think you're supposed to take may not be the path you end up taking.
Right.
And I had a client one time who was so resistant to setting goals because he's like, if I don't do it the way I say I'm going to do it, it's going to make me feel bad. I'm like, why? Like, get there however you're supposed to get there. And so that may be slightly different than what you're saying, but that's what kept coming up in my mind is.
I don't think it's different. It's funny. So I just not long ago started taking a martial art, which is really ironic to take in a pandemic, but there are things you can do that aren't, combat. It's called Wing Chun. It's a type of Kung Fu. And my Sifu, my teacher, is really great. So when she gave me this really complicated form to do, and the first day I was just sort of like trying to follow her through it, and I couldn't get it in my head. And so I said to her the next day, I said, Sifu, can I break it down into individual parts and practice them all separately? And she says, well, what do you think? What would you normally do? I said, well, I would normally break it down. And she said, well, then break it down. She said, don't go outside the movements I'm teaching you. Don't go on YouTube and learn new movements. But within what I'm teaching you, within the framework, you can get there however you want to get there. And I just thought that was a great life lesson.
That is a great life lesson. Great wisdom from Michael here with us today on hype and using side doors. I'm always going to remember that now with you, Michael. Thank you so much for sharing your book with us and sharing the principles inside of it. And again, I really want to encourage you, if you're looking for ways to magnetize and really like pull in more of those ideal opportunities and ideal clients, hype is what I call buzz. Like I talk about creating buzz out there. We're talking about the same thing here. And this is a really extraordinary opportunity to learn how to tap into a lot of different ways to ethically create hype. So Michael, thanks so much. Remember, get the book on Barnes & Noble or wherever you buy your books. And we'll link that up in the show notes. So Michael, any last words before we wrap up?
I just want to say this was an absolute pleasure. I enjoyed every minute of it.
Good. Me too. And I know our listeners will too. And I hope you will join us in the Amplify Your Authority Facebook group and tell us what golden nuggets you got out of today's episode. We'll see you all over there. Bye for now. Thanks for tuning in today, Amplifier. Be sure to join us right now in the Amplify Your Authority community at authorityamplifiers.com, and I'll share my 7 proven tips to be a highly paid expert that stands out in a crowded market. Plus, we're going to keep this conversation going, and I want to hear from you how you're going to amplify your authority and make a greater impact. Before you go, please take a minute to give our show and our guests some love over on your favorite podcasting platform. Subscribe, rate, and review. Leave your full name, and I'll spotlight you and your authority on social media.